Let's move on to the next presentation. Dr. Eric Cheung from the College of Professional and Continuing Education of Hong Kong Polytechnic University will continue with the topic of post-COVID teaching and will share his views on preparing for online hybrid teaching in the post-pandemic times. Dr. Cheung is a lecturer of Division of Languages and Communication at PolyU CPCE. His main research interests are English for academic purposes and discourse analysis. Dr. Cheung, please.
Okay, thank you so much for introducing me. And can you all see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And thank you, Svetlana and team, for this wonderful symposium. In this talk, I'm going to share with you, depending on how fast I'm talking, two journeys I went on finding the right technologies for my undergraduate writing classes with social sciences and marketing students. And hopefully from these journeys, there are some observations regarding how we teaching practitioners go from here, facing the ongoing challenging yet exciting future of teaching with technologies. So the guiding model at TPACK or TPACK has been evolving since its introduction. So I'll briefly talk about the concerns, thinking with this model, especially with, it's not particularly talking about the forms of each knowledge constituent. I'll introduce a sociological lens for examining the meanings we convey when introducing technologies accompanying the subject content and analyzing why I failed or succeeded in doing so. So I'll close the talk with some thoughts about going beyond knowing what technologies, teaching methods, and subject content can do, and invite all of you to share how we can make clear knowledge about technology, pedagogy, and content for teaching professional development. Okay, I won't go into the detail about what TPACK is, since each constituent is pretty straightforward. And from the illustration here, you see the model blossoming like flower. We more or less have an idea about the end goals. When we subsume the knowledge basis to achieve a better integration of the knowledge about technology, pedagogy, and content knowledge. And sometimes we even have the learner's knowledge and context knowledge. So that's why I used the blossoming flower in the previous slide. And the TPACK framework has been blooming with more categories, integrating interdisciplinary knowledge, as you see the TPACK Excel model. So in one of my stories, I introduced corpus-based language pedagogy as a kind of corpus-based TPACK in the classroom, through which I use corpus technology to cater to students' language learning needs and a curriculum for guided discovery for teaching my writing subjects. I will focus on mainly content and technological knowledge because they are the main knowledges packaged and transferred to the students in the classroom. So under this context, content knowledge would be related to grammar to to meaning making, and the technological knowledge would involve the use of web-based corpus tools. So on my end, a TCK or technological content knowledge would be to present knowledge about language through the use of corpora. Okay. As more knowledge constituents are added to the base, the more complex TPACK has become. Well, which is true, especially when we are more aware of the context we're in and the learner's dispositions and needs. However, as the TPACK studies started flourishing in the 2010s, Graham, 2011, raised the theoretical concerns regarding the constructs, relations within, and value of the model. So I'll focus on a what here in this presentation. So since TPACK is built upon Schumann's 1986 model of PCK, each constituent of PCK still requires a lot of clarification and conceptualization. So the second concern regards the complexity of TPACK. As you see the blossoming flower, the TPACK Excel model proposed in 2012 has more refined overlaps. But as Graham pointed out, the underlying model of complexity may not be touched upon, as according to him, the constructs being integrated are broad and ill-defined. So this is especially so when a definition of each knowledge construct has multiple definitions. So for example, integrated constructs such as technological content knowledge and TPACK have this many definitions. When Cox, 2008, did a conceptual analysis of TPACK. So among the 13 definitions of TCK, there's only one pinpointing technology being considered new content in a discipline. So others are rather related to teacher cognition and perception about TPACK. And if we look at recent TPACK studies, many focus on empirical research on teachers' views on TPACK, such as to what extent they are competent with technology, how they think about themselves as competent in using technology in the teaching methods and integrate them into teaching content knowledge with respect to different social and age groups. However, as empirical research is often tied with specific contexts, it will be difficult to find out similarities and differences across contexts using the factors that need a lot of clarification, as Howard and Mayton reflected on ICT integration in education in 2011. So a few questions come across my mind as I show here in the slide. So what are forms technological knowledge and content knowledge take in the classroom incorporating technologies? And how different knowledge forms shift as we pack and unpack them for students in the classroom? And 3, how these forms match or clash with students and teachers' expectations. Okay. So to answer this question, or these questions, I'll introduce one specific dimension of what we call the legitimation code theory, or LCT, a sociological framework for researching and informing different knowledge practices. So this theory is an emerging sociological framework which has been applied quite a lot in educational research. So the dimension is I'm using is semantics, which analyzes how meaning is related to its context, is a situation, and is packed or condensed within a knowledge practice. A quick example for illustrating semantics is that since the teaching of many knowledge practices would involve a language or discourse, if you like, when I talk about iron in a chemistry class, the word iron itself packs more meaning than iron in the everyday situation. For example, when iron as a metal in chemistry class, it has got meanings such as the element symbol Fe and the atomic number and the mass, etc., incorporated in the word itself. But if we talk about iron here in everyday context, perhaps we are referring to the word to a particular piece of particular kind of metal, generally speaking. So we can consider meanings shift between simpler and complex ends, okay, and between the more abstract and concrete context. Okay, so juxtaposing these two axes arrives at a Cartesian plane with 4 quadrants. In English, the top left quadrant refers to abstract concepts conveyed in everyday knowledge, everyday language. Moving to the right, this quadrant refers to using technical knowledge to articulate abstract concepts. So the bottom left refers to everyday language illustrating with real-world examples, and the remaining quadrant on the bottom right corner will explain the real-world examples with a technical concept. So in the corpus-based language pedagogy classroom, the key abstract concepts on the top right-hand corner would involve those about grammar for meaning making, and the concepts for understanding what corpus is, including the keywords such as collocates, keyword in context, concordance lines, L1, R1. Okay, so which may be defined in simpler terms for novices, which means students. So on the top left corner, that means the teacher would define the concepts in everyday terms. The collocations are the ways words are strung across together. And we move down to the more contextualized text examples for illustrating the concepts on the top, bottom left corner, or the explanation of how students would go about the tools and engage themselves in the writing practice. So combining the concrete context and complex meanings is perhaps how these abstract concepts are used to explain the writing practices and text example. So let's bear in mind that this semantic plane only identifies the way particular knowledge is organized. So it's for a sketching where these knowledges resides unless we adopt a quantitative approach for plotting the locations more precisely on the plane. But so far, it's a small part of a theory we need for now. So finally, story time. So if time doesn't allow me to talk about all my stories, I'm sure you'll be more interested in learning about how I failed successfully. So the two stories happened in the third and fifth wave of COVID respectively, in that my two courses had to be conducted online synchronously, or I mean live. So my first story arose from my ambition of implementing a lesson plan using text archives, or what I've just mentioned, corpora. So I was teaching academic writing to a group of undergraduate social sciences students. And before the lesson, I have a brief walkthrough of the corpus I've been using and have found something useful or tool useful called a Corpus of Contemporary American English. So the classroom activities in the forms of a worksheet like the one at the bottom right corner and interactive exercises on Socrates on the top right corner required students to look for the appropriate ways to comment on their essay topics, like how they use adjectives, how they form the sentences with the adjectives. So unfortunately, things didn't go well as I planned on the paper. Aside from the technical issues arising from COCUS, the corpus, slow loading speed is painfully slow. There's occasional promo messages slowing down the corpus searches drastically. My students experience some kind of an information workload. As you can see, their comments saying that the corpus is difficult to use, the tool too slow, and they simply don't understand what those words on the screens are, like the L1, R1, and the concordances, although I might have explained to them in some other classes, but yeah, sometimes I might not have explained clearly, or they simply forgot. So the actual result, only 7 or 8 out of 22 students out of my class went through the 2-hour dizzying experience, did the exercises, and sent me feedback. So according to the reflections, as I said, they're having to understand English as the medium of instruction for explaining writing skills and grammatical ideas and concepts that were already challenging to them. So now with the corpus tool, they had to figure out the concepts behind the tool, the terms are coming along with the functions, and the critical reflection on language choice. So it becomes to them, it turned out that it is another grammar class. As I kept telling them, well, this class is not a grammar class, but a writing class. But still. So my original aim, so back to the lesson content, was to have them identify the patterns. So hopefully transfer them to the writing. So as I evaluated my teaching using the semantics plane, as I introduced, I found that I spent a lot of time unpacking concepts about corpus and target language strategies in a language they would find difficult to understand. So if they understood the concepts, they would figure out the patterns from the corpus data, text examples, and activities. That is the sentence pattern that you can see on the bottom left corner, so that they can apply these patterns in their actual writing practices. So this was also fulfilled the subject learning methodology, which is guided discovery. Okay, so I want them to use the corpus tool to engage with corpus searches to find out the answers that they need for writing better, like accumulating a vocabulary, for example. So I know time is running out, so I will focus on this story. So, but actually what the students expect as they reflected after the class from the surveys and how they responded in the class, it was actually pretty clear that they actually preferred a teacher-led approach in the online environment. So they were keen when I asked them to practice writing, or when I gave them the language patterns right away, and they would actually be writing something on the screen and then they send their answers to me for my feedback. So here we can see, sorry, it reminds me the time is up, but I will speed up here. We can see there is a clash between what my students and I expected. So I wanted to introduce abstract concepts about language and corpus for informing the learning. But given the time constraint in the classroom, many concepts about corpus left unexplained, as I had to make sure all activities were covered in the 2-hour lesson. So this meant that students had too much to take in, and I wasn't there in person to help transition or transfer the meaning unpacking from concepts to actual writing practices, which students actually wanted in a course that emphasized practical and procedural knowledge, as I have here at the bottom left corner. Okay, so I will skip a few slides, including story 2. So perhaps if time allows, I will give you a brief version of the story if you nicely ask. Sorry. Okay, so here it is. From the quick analysis of my classroom practice using semantics, I understood that corpus-based language pedagogy may not work in the online environment, potentially because 2 competing concepts were there awaiting unpacking. Okay, so the concepts about language and corpus technology, especially when presented in the language that they found difficult to understand actually or digest, burdened the students. So these concepts, these abstract concepts became a double whammy, doubling the abstractness. So students shut off at some point if they missed a particular point when I explained how the corpus tool could be used. It might be better for corpus tools that are taught in the physical classroom in person, where students can get immediate help from me. So of course, time would also be of essence here. Perhaps corpus searching skills for writing can be taught outside of the curriculum as an adjunct course, which will be something that I investigate in the near future. So closing the talk, it's important for me to emphasize here that I'm not trashing the TPACK models. I don't want you to go after me because of this. They have their values, of course, which are to raise our awareness about the knowledge we have to acquire as we are planning our lessons. Adopting standard and digital technologies and incorporating them into our teaching methods for unpacking content knowledge to help students learn. So as we build our knowledge about TPACK, we might want to keep thinking about, well, how we're moving forward with TPACK models by theorizing, defining and clarifying the knowledge base so that we have a better understanding about what we have missed when we take for granted qualities such as interactive, dynamic, and student-centered learning, and overlooked how technologies should help us move between abstract concepts and concrete examples, and go about technicalized to everyday language. And this kind of awareness may help us identify the potential clashes between how we intend to transfer knowledge to students and in what ways they want us to pack and unpack knowledge for them. So of course, we can only move forward if we can keep sharing what we know as experienced teachers and collaborate as a teacher professional development community. So I'm also aware that in my presentation, some ideas can be quite dense and hard to wade through. So I think this is where the dialogue begins. So I open the floor for you peers for questions, comments, and interrogation. Thank you very much for having me again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cheung. Okay, would there be any questions in the chat box or any questions that everyone can raise here?
Can I just maybe jump in, and not
Okay.
really a question, but something that I could definitely relate to? You mentioned that students' expectations didn't quite match what we as teachers would expect, and that we need to be kind of selective with technologies, some of which may not work in online environments. And I just feel that as teachers, we become familiar with so many different tools and things that we could use, and we tend to get a bit kind of too enthusiastic about trying and using them all in our practice. And I'm starting to feel that maybe sometimes students want just a human interaction. They have all these tools online already. So thinking of that corpus, of the corpus tools that you were integrating, we're trying them here at the Eye as well. And sometimes students are not too keen to explore them with us. So yeah, that got me thinking that maybe they just want us to be there and guide them, truly.
I think true, and especially in terms of the kind of corpus that we are using. If we're using the simpler kind of more user-friendly kinds of data search, data-driven learning tools, they may be more engaged. So I use another corpus in another class, and students seem to be more engaged. But of course, the motivation drops when the semester moves on with more like workload and stresses going on in the classroom. So thank you for your comment, Svetlana.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Svetlana. Thank you, Dr. Cheung. Very, very insightful presentation. Yes.